All right. So got 2:15 on the money, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'm Nathan Coberly. I am the VP of Architecture and Development at Physicians Mutual Insurance. And my presentation today is going to be on buffs and nerfs to IT culture. So have a little bit of fun with it. Bit of a video game theme, which I'll touch on here, but essentially what things bolster or detract from your IT culture. Let's see. So just a little bit more about me. Happily married, 4 kids, been here in Omaha, Nebraska for a long time, in the Midwest pretty much my whole life. We love our dogs. We all my family's more musical than I am, but I like messing around with the guitar as a hobby. But then my other hobby is video games. I'm a kind of an old school gamer, classically trained gamer. But my latest game I've been playing is more of the massive multiplayer online, going that direction. Fallout. I love the Fallout series, and Fallout 76 is my current game, and it is. I have a lot of fun with it. It's funny because people really like Fallout 76, or they really don't. It's kind of like no in between. So, but I do like it. It's a lot of fun, and developing my video game character and working on it and evolving it is a lot of fun for me. So hence the buffs and nerfs theme of my presentation. So but we're going to focus on IT culture. And I do want to say that I'm here to share my experience with IT culture, but I'm not an expert. I don't profess to be. There are folks out there who make this their career, studying organizational dynamics, and I am here really just to share my experience and what I've seen work and what I've seen not. And I'm hoping to also to draw on your guys's experience in IT culture, and what's buffed or nerfed your culture or department that you've seen work or detract in the past, as well as any good video game recommendations are also always welcome. So get right into it. So I'm gonna start out with the buffs that I've seen, that I've experienced, the things that increases the power of that game element of our culture, of our departments, and collaboration. And so I'm going to focus on that to start with before I get into the nerfs. And then I'm going to kind of go through all the buffs and nerfs that I have. It's a little hard to focus on my slides and focus on the chat, but I'll try and glance at it as I go. Otherwise, I'm really hoping at the end that you will share your buffs and nerfs in the chat, and we can maybe pick some of those up too, and I can learn from your experience, and you guys can learn from each other. So think of it as a participative exercise that way, and I'll just move through the ones I have and talk about a little bit of the why behind why I listed them, and we'll go from there. Cool? All right. So the first buff I'll talk about is kind of a Captain Obvious one, open communication and exchange of ideas. I mean, who doesn't say this? Who would ever say this is a bad thing? But my experience is, it doesn't just happen. You kind of have to be intentional about it. You have to create those opportunities as leaders. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that work for us, but I really can't stress this one. Great ideas can come from anywhere in the team, no matter what your experience. And so I always used to joke, like as an enterprise architect, that everybody's an architect. But the fact is, great ideas can come from anywhere. And so, some of the things that I have done that have helped work is I create intentional forums where folks are there to share ideas. We have an architecture review board that looks at where any of the architects, whether it be infrastructure, application, or data architects are all together and all looking at new technology or new use of existing technology, and sort of having that as a incubator and a committee to discuss those and make recommendations ultimately to what we do and don't do in terms of standards and new tech. We also have, we call it a technical design review, and that's a very open forum. We have developers of all ranks that will come to that. We'll present ideas or topics to discuss. That design can be on a cocktail napkin, it can be in Visio, it can be in whatever. But we'll talk about designs, especially around like our corporate API and pulling in new frameworks. Recently we had a really good conversation around Kafka and where we could leverage that and where we might not. And so, the design review is a great open forum where we invite design level discussions, and I've seen a lot of benefit from that. We also, we've adapted a strategic, at my company, Physicians Mutual, we've adapted a strategic planning process called Prometheus. And it emphasizes this idea of open planning, where you do your planning in the open. Your plans are available for most people to access and provide feedback on, do red teaming exercise to, sort of attack the plan and be the devil's advocate. And I think all those are great practices, again, for creating this open communication and open exchange of ideas. So, really all those are around the theme of create intentional collaborations. You can hope that they'll just happen organically, and sometimes they do, but a lot of times they don't. And so my encouragement would be to look at for opportunities for creating those collaborations very intentionally. I do list an article down here on our employees are talking about open communication, 5 tips around that. I thought it was a really good article. So there's the link. I'd recommend you can follow up on that for some other tips, but a great buff. I mean, you really got to have this. It's sort of table stakes to be innovative. So moving on. So DevOps culture, continuous integration, continuous deployment. It's all the rage, right? Everyone's talking about, delivery pipelines, automation, microservices, containers. Everyone's talking about this. They're either making inroads into it, or they've got parts of it going. Some folks are really got a good thing going. We've got a pretty good launch into it, and I would say it's worth it. Man, I mean, it's worth it. It really does make a difference. And I bring it up in the context of IT culture. To quote one of my senior right-hand persons, Dan Nielsen, quoted him as saying, "Quicker turnaround builds good momentum and a great rapport with our business users." There is something about moving smaller things that you can understand through a pipeline and getting those off the docket and into production in a more rapid fashion. It moves through scope easier. You understand what you're doing. It just makes everything work smoother, but it also creates this kind of culture and dynamic within the team and with the business about delivering value more quickly and more responsibly. And so, there's a lot to this. DevOps is a presentation in and to itself, and each aspect of it is probably a presentation in and to itself. And I'm not sitting here saying that we have it mastered by any means, but I can say that what we have done with it is worth it. And it pays. There's collateral benefit beyond the obvious. And in this case, I bring it up in the context of culture and the dynamic with the team and the dynamic with our end users. It's had a very positive effect. And so I bring that up as a buff. I think it enhances the culture of the department and very much encourage that. I did do a whole talk on our experience with moving this direction, and I have the link to that presentation down below if you'd like to see more on that. Again, Captain Obvious one, but sometimes obvious things are still worth stating, but camaraderie and friendship at work. I think it's very interesting because corporate culture is something that my company has put an emphasis on lately, and we've enlisted help with Gallup, who has a lot of great work on this topic, and they'll engage in companies to help assess that and coach on how to improve it. And so, but one of the things I think is very interesting, one of the cornerstone questions of Gallup's engagement survey is, do you have a best friend at work? And it's a really interesting question. It really throws people off, like, well, no, I don't have a best friend. I mean, but you kind of do in a lot of cases. And it really boils down to, do you have that rapport with a group of people at work that you can just be honest with, be open, kind of share your woes, share your successes, lean on a bit, have fun with. And what Gallup has found, for whatever the mechanics are behind that dynamic, they found that if you do have those people at work that you're that way with, it increases your engagement. It adds to your culture. And I found that to be true. And again, this is kind of like the open communication. You can say these things and they're great, but if you're not intentional about it, if you don't actually create these opportunities, and friendship, that idea really develops out of sort of unstructured, unforced time with people. And so we were intentional about that. We do kickball tournaments in our in the area outside our building. We do frisbee golf. And so we've just created these opportunities for not only for wellness, incidentally. It's a great idea around wellness and fitness, but it's also just that camaraderie, that friendship you develop by just having some unstructured time, having fun with your coworkers, and being intentional about that. And then you build these relationships that just smooths everything out. It greases the slids for a lot of dynamics and communication. And this, the one other thing I'd say on this is, and this has a flavor of innovation around it, but we do a quarterly ship it. Folks used to call it like a hackathon, but essentially we have this kind of 24 hours of innovation where the teams are just freed to, managers, backlog isn't telling them what to do. They're free to, do something creative, innovative, and fun. And we've seen a lot of benefit from that. There was a great presentation, I think, on last year's HDC. I know ProxyBid has a really good practice of this. I think they were featured in that presentation. I apologize, I can't give proper credit to the presenter and the other companies that were involved with that, but I'm sure you can find it. But it's a great practice. And not only does it kind of foster and reward this idea of innovation, but it helps further develop friendship and camaraderie. We've had some of these ship it teams form organically across different teams. And so you work with people you don't normally work with because you both kind of like doing this one idea or creating this app or kind of squashing this procedural problem that's been there forever that nobody has time to deal with. And so those are the kinds of things that you can do. They're all intentional, but I encourage it. I think it really does those types of things, and creating those opportunities to have camaraderie and friendship at work, I believe make a huge difference. Diversity, and I'm really coming at it from the practical side of this. It's simply a fact that your organization, your department will benefit from great diversity. And it really boils down to whether it's race or gender or culture or level of ability or age. You've got folks that are coming at problems from different perspectives with different lenses, and that generates different ideas. You have diversity of thought in the end, which creates diversity in ideas, and the multitude of ideas that can be brought together to form better solutions. And not only do you have better solutions as a result of diversity, but you have those other folks are learning from each other. They're learning from those different ideas, those different perspectives, which makes them better engineers and better problem solvers. And so there's a very practical benefit, in addition to all the other right reasons to focus on this. But it has a very practical payoff there, and I think it's a vital buff to your culture and your organization. And I have a link to a really good article around this, on why diversity and inclusion is driving innovation. It's a matter of life and death. It's critical to innovation, and I absolutely agree with that. And the IT industry, we've got a lot of room here to improve. Ageism in IT is real. That's a problem. There is a bias there. There is all kinds of bias there, and we're all very familiar with those. So this is something where being intentional about this, being inclusive, can be a great buff to your organization and has a very, very practical application and upside. Teams, getting your teams right. And now this is, again, one of those things that, I think a lot of people may have figured this out sooner than we did. But getting your teams right sized. And, we used to early on make a practice of having these big project teams that we'd form around these major projects. And then these projects would, they would progress, they would evolve. And then, when the project was done, then a lot of times that project team broke up, and then, new projects start up, new teams form, and you just sort of have that dynamic where teams, form for a while, then break up. And a lot of times they were, depending on the size of the project, they'd be sometimes quite large teams. I can tell you our experience has been much better with smaller teams. The classic example from Amazon is a 2-pizza team. If your team's large and your team shouldn't be any larger than it would take for 2 pizzas to feed them. But yeah, that 7-person team, cross-functional. The other thing that we've found that's worked really well for us is, and this goes back to that camaraderie and friendship, is to have really semi-permanent teams. Don't break them up and have all those bonds be broken, and that the velocity that those teams have acquired and working with each other, obfuscated, have to refigure all that out. By having semi-permanent teams, where they're together really indefinitely. And I only use the term semi-permanent because, what's permanent in this day and age, but, fairly permanent teams that we really look at it from a feature team or a skill set team, that they're capable of delivering this type of work or doing this type of development, which gets into an age-old question there, which is, well, yeah, that's great, but we really need somebody to own this application. The domain knowledge is real. Somebody has to understand this area of the business and build the rapport with those people and really kind of own this product, right? And that's very true as well. And so, our balance, the one that we struck is, we have these feature teams. For example, I've got up here Team A. They may own the applications around claims and premium processing, but they also have these skill sets in play. And what we can do, following a safe methodology and a portfolio value stream model, is, we can have corporate priorities say this project really needs to get done. And maybe that's too much for Team A, but then they can borrow that same skill set capacity on this other team, have them work on features for that project. It's still the product owner and the tech lead who accepts the pull requests over here and inspects the code and owns the product, but they're borrowing the capacity and skill set of this other team and driving features through that team because that's the corporate priority. That's what the portfolio says needs to happen right now. This other team is still responsible for the maintenance and upkeep and that primary responsibility of that commission system, but it's not necessarily exclusive. They can borrow capacity from other teams. You still need that product owner and that lead engineer, tech lead, whatever you call them, to manage the product, do those code reviews, make sure they own that application or system. And so that's a way. There's several benefits to that for us, because then, this team doesn't feel like they're kind of stuck in a rut. They get features from that other team. It's interesting. Maybe they're trying out new frameworks. Maybe we push some Python work their way because we're just backed up on a lot of data development or analytic type stuff, and they have some growth and learning opportunity there. So instead of, breaking up teams and organizing them around the project, we sort of break the project up in the features and then move that through delivery teams or feature teams. And so you get diversity of work, exposure to new systems, maybe even new frameworks, and but yet you still have ownership of the applications. And if you think about like the way open source projects work, where you'll have many contributors, they don't even know these people, but they're contributing. But you still got somebody who's responsible for that product. They're looking at those pull requests. They're deciding whether or not to accept them, that sort of thing. So it's kind of following that model. I feel like it's worked well for us. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying there isn't challenges, but we found much more success in getting a predictable velocity of teams forming that camaraderie and friendship, and of giving them, not letting them feel like they're stuck in a rut, just being, on that team, by diversifying the work that we flow through them as a generic feature team. And so that's kind of been our approach. We still move people between teams once in a while, but it's not, it's more a combination of other reasons. As a general rule, we try to kind of hold the teams together. And so, so that's my story there. It's worked for us. I'd certainly value to hear from you guys on your experience around teams and how you organize. But that has worked for us. It's been a buff, in my opinion. Direct business collaboration. Okay, I won't spend a lot of time on this one, but just to say that you don't want to form a barrier between your developers and the business and the stakeholders. I know with even with Agile, we have this product owner idea, and they're supposed to represent that product to the team, and that's true. I'm not taking anything away from that, but you really don't want, you want to be able to have the developer be able to talk to the business. You want them to understand the why, not just the what. You want them to know the spirit of the requirement, not just the letter of it, because a lot of times the business is articulating, what they need, but when they articulate why, that lets the developer then enter into the conversation and have a dialogue, maybe even present new ideas. It's like, well, what if we approach it like that? Would that address what you're going for with this? And the business might be like, well, yeah, that would work. And the developer's thinking, well, that saved me half the work to do it this way versus the other. So that's great. So don't be afraid to negotiate. Your developers know where the dragons be in things, and sometimes they can propose alternatives that sort of get to the same end with maybe less work than what had been proposed. The other reason behind that is a lot of times, and we have a lot of longevity at Physicians Mutual, our business partners. In some cases, they articulate their requirements in the guise of what they know and do today. In other words, sometimes even like some legacy systems sort of dictate the vocabulary they use when they articulate what it is that they want. And so they're inadvertently saying what they want or how they want it, and maybe not saying what. And sometimes getting to that why, getting to that what you're really after can help the team better negotiate and propose solutions and partner with them to really get to a better outcome. All right, moving along. Understand your true stakeholders. So I think this is a huge buff. So first off, my definition of a stakeholder is anybody who has the power to cause an initiative to fail. That's a lot of people. I mean, that's more people than you think. I mean, that's developers, that's system administrators, that's the business. Sure, it's management. You got a whole range of stakeholders when you look at it from that perspective. And in the end, just basic psychology, everyone's got a fundamental question. What's in it for them? And to an extent, you need to be able to anticipate that and answer that question for larger initiatives or larger change efforts, especially when you're looking to drive a change that may be disruptive. And so, my encouragement would be we have had great success in a few items where we have been intentional about this. And I'll just call out one example. We had an effort where we were looking to move towards containers and microservices for a large portion of our applications in corporate API. And there was a bit of a enthusiasm gap with developers on it. And it was interesting, when we kind of took some time to understand why. It is because they didn't want to containerize the mess that they had, the way we had done it. They didn't just want to take that, plop it in containers, and put lipstick on the pig. That didn't motivate them, right? They didn't want to deal with that. And so we were able to really understand that dynamic and understand that there was really this undercurrent where they wanted to shift towards using, Spring instead of Java EE. They wanted to kind of do some things differently. And once we understood that and we worked that back into our plan, we understood that stakeholder and where they were coming from, and we incorporated that in their plan, then they were on board, right? That's what was in it for them, is now they had this future picture to look forward to unlock discretionary effort towards it, to really make it happen. And so understand your stakeholders, understand what motivates them, and keep that in mind in addressing that, and form and broaden that coalition of the willing to drive changes for, especially bigger, more significant changes. And then again, I touched on this, but be intentional about collaboration, create those opportunities. And I do want to mention, I reference the UNO College of Business has the Center for Collaboration Science, and they've really got some outstanding articles and theories around how to be intentional about collaboration. And so I call them out. I learned a lot from taking some classes from some of the professors that were specifically on that topic, and I do highly recommend some of their published works in terms of thinking through how to be intentional about creating collaboration. All right, that's my list of buffs. Again, as I move through this, I'm going to be very interested to hear about your buffs and some of the things that you guys have found that work. What's missing from my buff list that you're like, man, I can't believe that wasn't in there. This really makes a big difference. I'd love to see those. So think about that. And I'm going to go through the nerfs. So these are the things that take away from that game element, that turn that great shiny weapon you're using in the game into a Nerf gun. And so what things nerf your IT culture, what things detract from it, take its power away. So the first one I'll touch on is the brilliant jerk. It's funny, if I mention that term, my guess is many of you will have that name that pops in your head. Please don't put it in the chat. But we've probably all experienced them at one time or another. If you look at this sort of spectrum of skill versus will, this is that person that they're highly skilled, but their will to contribute and be a team player and that sort of thing, it just isn't there. And so those are tough. A lot of times as managers, you feel it's a bit of a hostage situation. Maybe they've got that critical knowledge on that system that no one else has. And there's a really strong tendency to tolerate them and to just let it lie. But what I would share with you is that there is again there's collateral damage to that. It affects the team. It keeps others from stepping up when they could. And so there's definitely a detriment to that. And it's hard to call out all the ways that it manifests itself, but it's there. And I think it detracts from the culture and dynamics of the team around them. And so what I would say is I would follow the advice in the article I referenced down here on kind of dealing with that. But essentially, it's time for a difficult conversation. You really need those folks. They need to be rock stars. They need to move into that category. They need to shift that way, or they really need to move on, I guess would be the blunt position on it. A heck of a lot easier to say than do. And I'm not pretending otherwise. But if you're looking at it on its face, it's really time for a difficult conversation. Hopefully, because those people are usually they've been around a long time. They're, hopefully there's a good rapport that you can work from and really try to coach them into moving towards that rock star position. But that really needs to be the destination, or you want to start to look for alternatives. And so to the degree you tolerate them, it will detract from your culture would be the nerf I would call out with this one. And again, I'd reference that article. It's got some great comments. I thought it was really funny on the low skill, low will, the wonder. Everyone wonders why they're still there. But yeah, it's something where, if they are that good, but they just have this incredibly poor attitude, not a team player, brings everybody down. It's something you want to deal with if you really want to maximize your culture. All right. Many of you will identify with this, but the date-driven death march. Fixed date projects. And so let me just first off start out by saying everyone knows that, sometimes dates are fixed. It's just, sometimes there's a compliance date that has to be hit. Sometimes, that IT project, let's say it's a landing page for a big marketing campaign, is tied to marketing spend on TV, internet, radio, things like that. And once that spend happens, that site has to be available. The date's fixed. It just is. And so I don't bring this up pretending that there isn't times when a date is the principal consideration. I know that it is. In all of our business areas, it is. But this one, it's easy to get into trouble with from a culture, a morale perspective. And so I guess what I would say is, first off, just know there's a propensity for things to have very negative consequences within the team and the culture around these. I know from some early days at the company that I'm at, there were some projects that it's taken us a long time to live down the reputation that it generated. And so, and I'm happy to say I believe we have, but it's because, we steered away from doing some of those things we were doing early on. But you want to be careful, especially with your arbitrary deadlines. Somebody just pulls a date out of their, and, just be careful with those. Ultimately, it boils down to the inevitable iron triangle. No matter how agile you are, no matter what your methodology, it's an underwriting principle that's there whether you like it or not. And so, you have to work within the triangle, right? So if the way Agile wants to work with a fixed date project is the time is fixed, that's fine. But then you're really focused on having a prioritized backlog of scope where the most important things are at the top of the backlog. And, you're working on those first and delivering the most value early on so that when you hit that date, you have most of what you actually need in place. It really focuses on what is your minimum viable product. When you start looking at a date, and you back from there, manage your prioritized backlog, and you iterate through the work. And again, hopefully by the time you get to that date, you've got the most important things in place. If it starts to evolve from here, right? Well, what if that minimum viable product is most of the backlog? It's all got to be there, and the date's fixed. Well, then you're looking at, like I mentioned earlier, trying to pull in other teams, spread the features out, maybe some consulting, staff augmentation, or outsourcing. You start to look at those options to increase your velocity, capacity, budget, however you want to look at that third leg. I called it velocity, but so you look at those options. The biggest risk, this is where you get into the death march, is when you lock in all three. When you lock in scope and time and budget, capacity, velocity, whatever you want to call it, you turn the iron triangle into the unholy square, or diamond in this case, I guess. But basically, if all three are fixed, then quality starts to suffer. Basically, if you can't cut scope, you can't increase the time. If you can't cut any of those things, then you're going to start cutting corners, right? And that's where you really start to enter into the death march. By fixing the time, it's a morale killer. By sacrificing quality, your rock stars are going to start to exit. Nobody wants to do crap work. So beware the iron triangle. Be careful with fixed dates. They're real. We get it. Everyone's got them. Recognize when they're real and when they're arbitrary. Don't pretend the arbitrary ones are real. But just be careful with them. Work within the triangle. Don't pretend like you can lock all three. It doesn't work. Multiple bosses. Especially these days, you got a scrum master, a product owner, a dev manager, a lead engineer, whoever else. It's a nerf to have to keep doing status updates over and over and over. And so, you need to designate one person to funnel updates to, especially when you got like a critical issue or something like that. Let the developers work, let them work the issue. A lot of us have tools that we update, and we love our tools. It is the kiss of death if you have a developer updating more than one tools, with the same information. That's definitely a nerf. And so it's hard enough to do it anyway. As much as possible, you want things to be updated in the context, in the flow of what developers already have to anyway. Things like being able to put a ticket number and a commit message for your commit and push to the repo that automatically closes the ticket with your comment for the commit. Things that you count twice like that they have to kind of do anyway are great little things you can do to kind of help some of that. Having that one person, whether it be the scrum master or the product owner, be the conduit for information and updates, kind of shield the team from all the status requests. So it can be a nerf. So something to, again, be intentional about. Doing agile versus being agile. It's sort of in the same vein of some of the things I've already talked about, but again, look at the spirit of the law. Look at things like what SAFe does with tying overall value streams or portfolios down to features. So you got this overarching why and driver behind things, and lets you have a better sense of priority and impact. Look at agile methods, in my opinion, and it's just that, my experience, but look at agile methods as a toolbox as opposed to a religion. And I know a lot of folks, agile is their focus and career. That's all they do is consult on it. And there's value in that. I'm not taking anything away, but I one time I heard the phrase, we need to recommit our vows to agile. And I thought, my gosh, is this a wedding? Am I taking an oath of office? It's a development methodology. Let's keep it in perspective. But, agile has a lot of value, but each organization's different. You got to kind of make it work and fit for you. And I would look at it as a toolbox, not as, not as something more than that. My opinion, may have folks disagree with that, but there it is. All right, so the last one is the process police. Those folks that say, "'cause I said so," which ties into some of the things I already kind of mentioned. Rules and process that we institute without an obvious purpose or that defy common sense, I think is a huge nerf. You want to watch those kind of onerous internal processes that impose on many for the benefit of just a few, right? Developers are busy. You want to streamline developers. You want coding, you want developing. You don't want them, following this laborious process that keeps them from doing that. Yes, we need some process and it's good, but in the spirit of lean, you want to keep it as lean as possible and streamline it. Again, look out for those things where it makes it easy for a few people, but imposes on many. A lot of times that's a process worth looking at. Okay, I believe this is my last one. Most lack of it's the inverse of my very first one: the lack of listening, the lack of collaboration. Um, this is especially true for sometimes different team members feel invisible, right? Especially like maybe you're more entry level developers. Maybe you're even sometimes mid level. They don't feel like they have a voice in things. And my encouragement would be to give them a voice, be intentional, create those opportunities. They have great ideas. You want to draw those out and invite them into the conversation and create an environment where they feel like they have a voice. And again, that really comes from being intentional about it. Oh, it wasn't the last one. I'm sorry. Fairly straightforward one. I'll just quickly say indecision sometimes is worse than the incorrect decision. It's great to do everything I was mentioning about, having a committee, inviting everybody in, but you can't deliberate forever, and you need to ultimately have somebody make the call. So that committee needs a chair, and that person needs to have the authority and engineering credibility to make the call. And so let the collaboration happen, let the ideas come forward, but sometimes you can just deliberate on and on and on and on and on. And I've seen that be a detriment, a nerf. And so let everyone have their voice, but then somebody make the call. A lot of times, even a suboptimal decision is better than no decision or indecision. So that would be, yes, my last one. So I apologize. I have not been able to really look at the chat as I've gone through this, but kind of glancing at it now in the minutes that we have left. But I guess I'll ask the question. If you already put it in the chat and I haven't had a chance to see it, I do apologize. But what's missing? What things would you throw out there that should have been in this list but aren't? Is there maybe say whether it's a buff or a nerf? But are there any buffs or nerf that you would call out for the group that you think made a significant makes a significant impact on your culture of your department or teams? Or if you have any questions on any of the ones I presented. Just kind of looking. All right. So one nerf is team building exercises where people feel forced or coerced to do an activity they don't want to do. That's a nerf. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Structure activities such that it's great for devs, but not for ops. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point. Okay. Paired programming. Yeah. Yeah. That's something I've not had a lot of experience with that. We've done it in pockets, but not as a practice. So it's interesting to have that called out. Yeah, absolutely. I believe, Nate, the slides will be shared in addition to the recording. Is that correct? I'm sure that it is. Yeah. Oh, that's a really great one, Sarah. Yeah, I'd hone in on that one. Learning cultures, allowing people to be wrong and to learn from their mistakes. Um, yeah, I could not agree with that one more. And I said I had something that kind of alluded to it a bit earlier around encouraging responsible risks. But yeah, you want to celebrate. You got to be really intentional with it, but sometimes they're going to take a responsible risk and it's not going to pan out. They're going to pull in that framework and it's just not going to pan out. You want to be very careful how you handle those. You want to celebrate those instances. You want to celebrate successes as well as failures. if you want innovation, because you don't want people to be afraid to try. Encourage to make time for continuous learning. Absolutely. Okay to fail and learn. Letting teams identify and work on technical debt. And I will touch on that. We had a. I appreciate Alex your comment too on paired programming that can, can be a buff or a nerf depending on how well you're ready for it. But the letting teams work on technical debt, that is one of the things we made it a point on our ship it practice where we're that 24 hours of innovation. We did call out that one of the things you can do is squash that nemesis bug. That could be your ship it, project, is getting around that thing that's a pain but never gets prioritized, or maybe cleaning up some of that technical debt. And then depending on your iteration schedule, we have something where it's a shoulder iteration that we're lighter on work during some of our major releases that we do some of that as well. But yeah, absolutely, taking some time to deal with that debt is that technical debt is, I think, a huge buff to do that. Yeah, it's the art of constructive criticism. And yeah, Nate, I think that's a great one to call out. It's finding that spot, and I think some of that honestly comes from that level of camaraderie. If you have a rapport and a relationship with your team members, I think they're much more open to share constructive criticism in a way that doesn't cause offense. And they learn to put it in a way that is better received, and the person receiving it, because of that relationship, is their propensity to take offense from it is a lot less as well. Especially if in their experience with that team member, they've been able to reciprocate and maybe offer ideas or constructive critiques, back to them. And so at one point or another. And so you sort of have this bank account of trust that, if you have that camaraderie develop, makes those kinds of conversations a lot easier. All right. Well, we are over the allotted time. I want to thank everyone for your attendance. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the input and feedback as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nathan. Again, this was an amazing presentation. For those of you that were able to get in and catch most of the presentation, there was a lot of value. And again, this will be shared with the attendees via email of the recording and the slides. I would like to thank Nathan again for presenting what buffs and nerfs, or I'm sorry, about buffs and nerfs. And if you would like to continue on with the conference, please join us in the Lunavi networking section, where you can network with all the attendees and companies. And join us tonight for the HTC Mesh Party, sponsored by Lunavi as well. And everyone else, enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Nate. Thanks again, everyone.